Hi guys, Grand J here and welcome to another one of our videos. Opus 6 is nearly officially out and here we have the fourth part of our Opus 6 set review series, and today we'll be talking about the new Earth cards, so let's get started. First of all, we got a backup called Agito Marajudo. It's a 5-cost backup. When Agito Marajudo enters the field, select one of the two following actions. Cast one summon from your hand without paying the cost, or choose up to 2 summons in your break zone and add them to your hand. So this is actually a pretty well costed and actually pretty high value backup. So let's look at the second part first, right? So first of all, choosing 2 summons and putting them from the break zone back to your hand, you're gaining effectively 4 CP. So effectively, this backup does become from a 5 CP backup to a 1 CP backup if you do discount that CP cost. So actually, in regards to that, that's pretty solid. By itself, and they don't specify element restriction, so you can put summons of any color back into your hand depending on whether you want to play light or dark summons or a summons from your secondary color. So in terms of the utility of this card, already that's pretty good. But the card that the part that really sets this card apart is the fact that you get to cast 1 summon from your hand without paying the cost. Now, because of this, obviously you want to be casting the biggest possible summon you can for free, right? So obviously this really pushes towards playing those 9-cost Bahamut or a 9-cost Raiden, just so you're getting the maximum value. So if you consider that most backups are typically 2 CP backups, effectively if you're spending if you're casting a free cost summon or higher, then you're getting even or better value on this backup. So pretty much, if you're casting like a 4-cost summon, you're going to get your value back on this card straight away. So yeah, this card is this card is very solid. Obviously, it is a unique backup, so you can't have multiple copies of this in your deck. But Earth does have plenty of ways to destroy its own backup. So if you do want to build a strategy where you really get to abuse the hell out of like Bahamuts and Raidens, this is a great direction to go in. And yeah, in addition, if you do happen to have more of these summons in your deck, or you need to recur them, playing additional copies of these onto the field allows you to recur those summons back to your hand. So this card is actually very strong. It's not one of those backups that you get to put into play early on because it doesn't give you sort of a lot of value in that regard. Because at the early stages of the game, you probably don't have too many summons in your break zone. And yeah, there's generally not a big field for on your opponent's side that you really want to cast Bahamut or Raiden on. But towards the mid to late game, I could see this backup coming in and being a massive powerhouse to the board state at any time. Next, we have Dark Knight. It's a actually before we move on. In addition, Agito is also an FF11 character, which means that it does work in and amongst the Star Sybil package. So Star Sybil is actually able to search this card out. And we all know from the previous Opus how strong Star Sybil was. So yes, this obviously works into that archetype very well, and also happens to be a part of the same color. So yeah, so that's just like another great synergy that this card adds to that archetype. If you do want to play it down the Earth and Fire variant, there are some additional cards that also support this idea in the form of like cards like Volker and so on. So yeah, so it seems like every set we're like just leaking out a couple of FF11 cards every single set. And yeah, this adds into that archetype as well. So really excited, pretty keen to try out this card. And not just only like a mono Earth deck, but also like splash it into some duo color decks as well to see what sort of crazy shenanigans we can pull off. Next, we have Dark Knight. It's a free CP forward at 9,000 power, so it's quite a bit above the curve. But if Dark Knight receives damage, the damage increases by 4,000 instead. So effectively, what this card is saying is that it's a 9,000 power attacker that effectively has 5,000 power in terms of defense, right? In most instances, obviously, if your opponent does multiple small packets of damage, it's much more severe to Dark Knight, right? So obviously, as a standard unit, it seems like Earth's like main go-to standard units are either monks or Dark Knights, right? And it seems that Dark Knights generally all have pretty easy ways to pump themselves up, and monks typically have like very bravish sort of type effects. In regards to Dark Knight, it seems like this is one of those Dark Knights that would really be well suited for the original Opus 1 Warrior Light that gives them plus 2,000 power in first strike, because obviously if this Dark Knight has first strike, it doesn't receive damage in combat and it goes up to a massive 11,000 power. So this is a good combination for this card. That being said, we are at a stage of the game where there are plenty of standard units in the game. And I'm not sure that this Dark Knight really sort of is a good fit for an Earth type standard unit deck. You do have cards like Berserker, which are pretty well statted as well. There was a previous one that was a free cost 8,000 power for, which is generally a pretty good stat line to be at, especially for a standard unit. And I'm not sure if you really need your standard unit to be this big, even though this is quite well costed. If you're splashing in something like Wind Earth, you can get Arc to give you guys plus 1,000 power, and generally pushing your Berserker from 8,000 to 9,000 also pretty good. Yeah, I feel that there are other ways to buff your standard unit forwards, so you don't need a forward that's just like base 9,000 power. In addition, like having the other Dark Knights, such as the 2-cost Dark Knight, or the small, or the other Dark Knights that increase the power with as much damage that you receive. While they start off a lot weaker, they do get to about a similar level power as well. So it's really up to you to determine for your standard unit decks what sort of standard units you want to play. But I think depending on the different niche situations, there are better options. And in regards to this Dark Knight, I think it's kind of like a reasonable standard unit card, but it doesn't fulfill any one of those niches particularly well. Next, we have Warrior of Light. So it's one of the heroics for this set. It's a 6-cost forward at 7,000 power, so it's well below the curve. But when Warrior of Light enters the field, choose one job stand unit of cost 2 or less from your break zone, play it onto the field. When a job stand unit enters the field, Warrior of Light gains plus 2,000 power until the end of the turn. It's also got an S ability, so Indomitable Charge, S to Earth. Until the end of the turn, all forwards you control gain plus 3,000 power and Brave. So the first thing that came to mind is that this card is very similar to the 5-cost Water Legendary Lena, in that they both bring a 2-cost forward, 2-cost character back. So Lena could bring back a 2-cost water forward, and typically this did in most cases bring back Knight, which was a 2-cost standard unit forward that could generally is around the 8,000 9,000 power mark in those decks. Warrior Light in this case, a couple of caveats that are different. So first of all, even though it does cost 1 more, there are some additional niches to this effect. So first of all, it says choose a job standard unit. So unfortunately, that does restrict the targets for this deck. However, that being said though, it doesn't restrict the color, and it doesn't restrict whether they are forwards or backups or even monsters, even though I don't think that there are any standard unit monsters at this stage of the game. So that being said, yeah, this card can bring out either a forward or a backup. So in terms of like early game plays, because a lot of 2-cost backups happen to be standard units, it's not unreasonable for you to play this early on. Like discard 3 cards to put this guy into play and bring back one of your 2-cost backups, put that into play, right? Because you're going to be discarding 1 card to put a 2-cost backup into play as well. So effectively, this card becomes like a 2 CP 7k forward in that scenario. So that's actually pretty well costed in that regard. Yeah, obviously, in addition, every time you play a job standard unit, and this includes both forwards and backups, so you don't really even need to build specifically a standard unit deck. As long as you happen to have quite a lot of standard unit backups, you'll be able to get like Warrior of Light at a pretty good value most of the time. And obviously, like I was talking about earlier, one of the more common standard units that Earth does tend to play are monks. So there is some monk support in this set, and there are like monks that have been released this set as well. So potentially playing a Warrior Light in a more monkish focused deck can actually give them a lot of value, simply because every time you put it back up down during your turn, this guy gets plus 2,000 power, pumping up from 7,000 to 9,000. And if you have any sort of additional buffs that give your Earth forwards like additional power, then yeah, he's just like at a higher base power already. So in terms of that, his strength is pretty solid. His S ability is actually not too bad, giving all you guys plus 3,000 power. It's pretty solid. There is no restriction on this effect, so in the sense that you can do it on both your turn or your opponent's turn, so you can use it offensively or defensively. And giving all you guys Brave allows you to just have a big turn of attacks where you're pushing. So if you do happen to have a turn where you have like 3 forwards out on the field and the board is a little bit stalemated, using this S ability will generally allow you to just straight up attack with all your forwards. And because they have Brave, they are able to defend as well. So I think that this card is a little bit potentially underrated. People sort of looked at the cost, people looked at the effect and thought they were all a little bit too niche. But I think actually in practice, this card is going to be a lot better than people think it is. Next, we have Epitaph. So it's a free cost backup. When Epitaph enters the field, you may search for one category FFCC forward and add to your hand. So I think FFCC is Final Fantasy Crystal Chronicles. So at this stage of the game, there are only 3 targets for this card. You've got Leo, you've got Hugh and you've got Mira, which was released a set earlier. 2 of these, in the form of Leo and Hugh are Earth forwards, and Mira being a water forward, right? At this stage, yeah, because there's not many targets, I don't know if this card is going to see play. That being said, though, both Leo and Mira are cards that work very well in the Earth Water monster deck. So because there happens to be an archetype that already exists, and it's a pretty solid archetype, and both these cards are searchable in that archetype and also happen to be in the same color of that archetype, this card might see play. So in general, this searcher, while it's the same value as all the other free cost searchers, the number of targets it has is very limited. And it doesn't have EX burst to sort of justify it as well. That being said, though, because the targets it search for fit into an archetype and it is in the right color for those archetypes, this backup might actually see play in the Earth Water Monsters deck, just because Leo is pretty strong in that deck, and Mira obviously is pretty good in it as well. So yeah, so outside of this, you strictly won't see Epitaph, especially at this stage of the game where there are just not that many Crystal Chronicle forwards. But over time, as we see more Crystal Chronicle forwards enter the game, then potentially we might see more prevalent play. Next, we have Scholar. It's a 2-cost backup for 2 Earth Dull. Put Scholar into Break Zone. Choose 1 Earth summon in your Break Zone. Add it to your hand. So this card is this backup is very similar to a backup that we had in Opus 2, which was Rydia. It was a 4 CP backup that EX burst when Rydia enters field. Choose 1 Earth summon from your Break Zone. Add it to your hand. So both these cards have the restriction of you can only choose an Earth summon, and obviously put it from the Break Zone back to your hand. So it allows you to recur an Earth summon. Now, in terms of cost, Scholar does have some pros and cons compared to Rydia. So obviously it's a standard unit, so you can have multiple of these guys on the field. That being said, I don't think you really want to have too many of these guys on the field, or too many of these guys in your deck in general. Maybe only 2 copies. Generally because it's an effect that is more relevant towards the mid or later game, and you don't want to stack too many backups that are only good then. In addition, he is a 2-cost backup, so even if you don't have any targets early on in the game, you can just put him down as a 2 CP backup, and later on in the game you can use its effect. In addition, you can sort of you choose the Earth Summon when you use this card's break ability, so you don't actually have to have targets early on in the game, and you don't have to make a decision when you put this card onto the field. So yeah, so you can use this responsibly in the sense that if you have like a Carbuncle or a Titan or a Golem or a whole bunch of different summons in your break zone, when your opponent makes a play, you can always respond by using the Scholar to break it and then search for the specific summon that counters your opponent's play. And because, yeah, generally most Earth summons are all sort of very counter type abilities, yeah, having Scholar to sort of toolbox to the right one at the right time is actually pretty handy. That being said, in terms of cost, it actually is worse than Rydia in terms of its value. So you effectively are paying 5 CP overall, 2 from the original backup, 2 for the ability, and then dulling and breaking the Scholar. Whereas Rydia, you don't break her, and she's 4 CP. So Rydia already is kind of like well statted in the sense that she's a 2 CP, she's effectively a 2 CP backup to recycle through that Earth summon. So so in that regard, like Rydia is better costed, and Rydia also has EX burst as well. So occasionally you will just get like a random like free summon from receiving damage. So that being said, like I'm personally leaning more towards Rydia in this situation, but the fact that Scholar is a standard unit, and there is some standard unit support in the form of like the new Warrior of Light, that may push it in that direction as well. So there are pros and cons to this card. This is one of those situations where both cards are relevant and are decent at what they do, and they both have their pros and cons. And I think that how these 2 cards compare is really a good example of good card balancing. So neither card is particularly better in either scenario. There are pros and cons to both, and I think Scholar could potentially be a 1-1 split between Scholar and Rydia if you do decide to go down in that direction for your deck. Next, we have Machinist. It's a 2 CP backup for Earth 1 Dull. Put Machinist in the break zone. Choose 1 forward of 5,000 power or less and break it. So yeah, so it is obviously a 2 CP backup, and it's a standard unit, like a lot of other backups at that sort of cost range. But effectively, you are paying 4 CP and breaking a backup in order to choose a forward of 5,000 power or less and break it. Now, this So on its own, you are actually paying quite a lot to destroy a forward that's not particularly powerful. Obviously, 5,000 power isn't particularly high power, and most forwards are generally able to outfight it from the 3-cost range and above. And even 2-cost forwards generally will trade against it. In Earth specifically, there's most of their 2-cost forwards are generally at the 6,000, 7,000 power mark. So yeah, you're generally not too afraid of any forward that can fight at 5,000 power. Obviously, like if most of the time if you use this, it's probably going to remove a small sized forward that's got some sort of non-combat type ability. That being said, though, like Earth isn't a color that really sort of makes use of any sort of power reduction abilities. So maybe if this was like in a color that had more of those type of effects, such as water, or such as lightning, then potentially we might have seen more play from a card like this. However, at this stage, it's just kind of like a little bit too costly. Earth does have some pretty reasonable removal abilities right now in the game. And yeah, it's kind of hitting targets that Earth doesn't really sort of have a problem with. So at this stage, I don't really think this card fits into the Earth archetype particularly well. Next, we have Gigas. It's a 4 CP monster that's got the ability pay 0 until the end of the turn. Gigas also becomes a forward with 9,000 power. When Gigas attacks, Gigas will not activate during your next active phase. You can only use this ability once per turn. So a couple things to note. So even though, even though it's only a forward when you activate its ability, at the start of your turn when you reactivate all your cards, even if this is a monster, it still won't reactivate. So do keep that in mind. So yeah, so for 4 CP, you're effectively getting like a 9,000 power transforming forward monster. So yeah, so in terms of cost, I feel it's just a little bit overcosted, and its value doesn't seem to be good enough. It seems like a lot of these like larger sized monsters this set aren't particularly impressive, and I think Gigas is just like another one of those monsters that is just not particularly impressive. Earth generally doesn't have issues with putting out big forwards. Obviously, a card like Gigas is solid in the sense that he's a monster during your opponent's turn, so you don't feel too bad swarming out with more monsters on the field. That being said, though, he doesn't really sort of bring any sort of additional utility. He only has a big body, and Earth generally doesn't have an issue with that already. And its drawback is kind of annoying in that if you do want to attack with him, he can't attack on your next turn, nor can he defend, because he's dull, right? So he effectively freezes himself every time he attacks. Obviously, there's ways to get around it in Earth by giving it Brave. So if you are playing a card like Momodi to give it Brave, he can attack every turn. But then again, for 4 CP, wouldn't you rather just play a solid forward that's like 8,000, 9,000 power, and has like some sort of additional ability besides from just being a forward that can attack? So something like a Guy or a Yang Ursula or a Vincent or like New Y'shtola. I would much rather go down a forward that brings in additional utility value or additional threats rather than just strictly having a monster that can transform and occasionally attack. So that's my opinion. I don't rate this card particularly highly. And yeah, I don't think you'll see that much play in my personal opinion. And the next card is Krill 14. It's a 2 CP backup. Its job is Sign of the Seventh Dawn, which is probably the most important part about this card, actually. And its ability is Earth 1 Dull. Choose one forward you control. During this turn, it cannot be returned to its owner's hand by opponent's summons or abilities. So this card's ability is very similar to Ritz, in that Ritz protect all your characters from being returned to your hand from your opponent's abilities. Do note that this card doesn't protect your cards from your own abilities putting stuff back to your hand. So if you are playing that one Water Leviathan, or if you're playing something like Winds of Valor, then it doesn't protect your characters from being put back to your hand. That being said, though, this effect is really quite niche, so it's effectively only relevant against those two colors. So it's only relevant against specifically water and against wind, like a mill wind deck. So yeah, so outside those two cards, you won't really see any cards that will like put cards back to their owner's hands. So as a result, I don't think that Krill is particularly useful in the metagame, or its effect isn't particularly useful. But it does happen to be a Scion of the Seventh Dawn, and there are a couple more cards for this set for Scions. And since Scions are generally cards that get stronger the more Scions you have on the field, this card is probably going to see play in the Scions deck, simply because it's the right color, and it's another Scion backup to help you get to that higher Scion number. And it does, there is a new card in the set that is probably going to rely on how you playing Krill more often in your deck. So yeah, its ability is pretty lackluster, not going to be relevant like probably 80% of the time. But yeah, it's the fact that it's a Silent Seventh Dawn and it's a 2 CP backup. You're just gonna put it down and you're never gonna touch it ever again, pretty much. Next, we have Kate Sif. It's a 2 CP backup. Its job is Watchman, even though it is from Final Fantasy XIV, so it's not a Scion of the Seventh Dawn, unfortunately. Its ability is Earth One, like Earth Dull. Put Kate Sif into the break zone. Choose one summon, choosing a forward you control. Cancel its effect. So its ability is a lot like Carbuncle that we saw much earlier on from Opus 2, I believe. Where yeah, you could choose a summon targeting a character you control, cancel its effect. So do note that Kate Sif, in comparison to this, it's only able to choose a summon choosing a forward you control, whereas Carbuncle allows you to choose a summon targeting a character you control. So one interesting thing is that Carbuncle could protect your backups from being destroyed by Hecaton Care, whereas Kate Sif can't, right? So that's just kind of one very niche small weakness that Kate Sif has compared to Carbuncle. That being said though, you're paying effectively a similar cost of like double Earth Dull, and putting Kate Sif into the break zone. So you're effectively paying a very similar cost, and it happens to be a 2 CPU backup as well. So in that regard, you're paying effectively the same cost. You're getting the utility of having a backup, but you're losing the surprise factor. So there will be times where if you have Carbuncle in hand, your opponent might play like a Raiden, or play like a Raiden or a Bahamut or something, and you just happen to Carbuncle them when they cast a big summon. That's a really big swing for you, and generally it feels like you're probably going to win in those stages of the game. However, Kate Sif, as long as you have it on the field active, your opponent's always going to have to play around it. So yeah, you lose the surprise factor of this backup. There are some pros and cons in this scenario. But yeah, depending on like what sort of deck you build and sort of how controller you want to be and how much sort of defense you want to have, you can play this backup. So typically, I don't think Earth has very much room in their decks for these sort of type abilities. But yeah, as a 2 CP backup, you can just kind of slot it into your backup line. And in general, it's probably not going to be too bad. Next, we've got Evoker, 1 CP backup, standard unit. Not much to say about this card. It's pretty solid. You'll see it more in monocolor decks, and I've talked about this quite a lot already. Earth can make uses for it in that it is a standard unit, so it's a cheap backup to put in play if you need to break a backup. And additionally, cards like Ingus and cards like Warrior of Light both allow you to play standard units for free. So yeah, worst case scenario, you can always like put Evokers in. Additionally, the new Warrior Light also gets little buffs when you play standard units as well. So this does sort of synergize into that archetype reasonably well. Next, we have one of the more interesting cards for Earth this set. We have Cactuar. It's a 4-cost summon. Choose one forward, deal it 4,000 damage for each CP of a different element you pay to cast Cactuar. So basically for each different colored CP you use, Cactuar increases its damage by 4,000. So obviously, you want to play as many cards as you can to make Cactuar useful. That being said though, even the mono Earth deck can make use of Cactuar reasonably effectively, because typically if you're playing mono Earth, you're going to be playing like at least 2 or 3 copies of Shantotto, and Shantotto can be used to dull for various different element colors. So at the very least, while you have Shantotto on the field, Cactuar is going to be hitting for 8,000 because you just simply use Shantotto to dull for a different color, right? So obviously, outside of like just straight mono Earth, the new Leo that can make all your backups dull for different colors can really sort of pump up Cactuar. So in the ideal situation, Cactuar can hit for 16, although pretty sure like at 12,000 you're generally killing pretty much anything in the game. Pretty much when you get to free CP, Cactuar straight up killing anything for 4 CP, so it's actually pretty solid in that regard. And all you really need is just one additional way to create CP of a different color outside of your normal Earth backups, outside of Shantotto. And yeah, so like if you're like running like the dark some dark cards such as Camelot, Chaos, and Emperor, usually that trio has been seeing a lot of play recently. Yeah, it's very easy for you to have Chaos, Shantotto, Chaos, Shantotto, and just like an Earth backup to make this card a 12,000 power 12,000 power summon. And yeah, so like this card is pretty easy to use. Earth has got quite a couple of like these like sort of heavy costed summons that are able to generally do a lot of damage. So like it does fit in pretty well. And yeah, if you are playing like those sort of cards for Leo, I think it's a very good fit for those decks. Next, we have Titan. It's a 5 CP summon that's got EX Burst. Choose one forward you control and one forward your opponent controls. The former gains plus 2,000 power until the end of the turn. Then the former deals damage equal to its power to a ladder. So in English, give one of your forwards plus 2,000 power and deal its damage to one of your opponent's forwards, right? Yeah. So it's an EX burst, so it's very similar to what Raoban did back in the day. And I remember playing during the Opus 2 meta, whenever your opponent hits an EX burst with Raoban, you just, like, you felt so bad because pretty much it means that one of your forwards is just dead, right? And Titan, it's very much so one of your opponent's forwards is dead, because generally giving one of your sort of mid-range, mid-sized guys plus 2,000 power, and dealing damage to your opponent's forward generally allows you to kill something straight away. And because it's an EX burst, your opponent can't respond. Even as like a regular summon, it's actually pretty solid as well. People are like, if you think that, oh yeah, like, you know, like Raoban's cheaper or Atomos is effectively the same thing without the EX burst, Titan actually can create 2-for-1 situations, right? So in the sense that if your opponent's attacking with a forward that's only like say 1,000 or equal power to one of your forwards, if you block with one of your forwards, you can Titan your forward so that it gets plus 2,000 power. Use the damage dealing ability to kill one of your other opponent's forwards, and then because your forward's now larger, it will win the combat it's now blocking, right? So Titan can create like very solid like 2-for-1 situations in those scenarios. And the fact that it's got EX burst and isn't particularly overcosted for having EX burst is also pretty good, because generally when you have a card that has EX burst attached to it, the cost seems to add like 2 CP worth of cost to its base value to sort of justify the potential free EX burst value that you have on like these sort of summons. So yeah, so I think that Titan is actually like pretty solid. Its utility in sort of like winning fights and removal and also EX burst is actually pretty good. And it's sort of it's not particularly cheaply costed. But if you like can manage the 5 CP, which isn't too hard, you're getting a lot of value from this card most of the time. Next, we have Pavlov. It's a 2 CP backup. It's a FFCC backup. Dull. Choose one category of Crystal Chronicles forward. It gains plus 1,000 power until the end of the turn. Not particularly amazing, but it is a 2 CP backup that you can just kind of chuck in. There's not many targets for it. Obviously, we've only got Huyurg, Leo, and Mira at the moment. Leo potentially can be a pretty big powerhouse. Mira is one of those cards where you just really don't care if you power her up at all. And Huyurg is kind of a bit of a fighter, so it potentially does work into like one of those decks. Right now, there are just like such limited amounts of like Final Fantasy Crystal Chronicle characters in general, and they don't seem to really necessarily have a synergy with each other, in the sense that like you don't have like a very well established archetype for them right now. So like because of that, we won't see like too many like strategies built around Leo Huyurg, and because of that, Pavlov's ability is a little bit too niche and like won't see play all too much. So but definitely in the future that might change, as they might have a set that focuses on Crystal Chronicles a little bit more. We will see more cards and we will have like a better usage for this card. Next, we got Huyurg. It's a 5 CP forward at 7,000 power. EX burst. When Huyurg enters the field, you may search for 1-drop warrior and add it to your hand. If you control a card named Leo, Huyurg gains plus 1,000 power and brave. So, very similar to most cards around this stat line. 5 CP, 7,000 power. EX burst gets you a card, gets you a warrior card in this case. So effectively, in most situations when you play it, it's going to be a free CP 7,000 power forward. We spoke about the Earth archetype earlier in the Fire video, and right now there are not too many like relevant or particularly strong warrior cards that do sort of fit into a certain archetype. A lot of them just happen to be these cards that do something else and happen to have the warrior job. So yeah, so we got like from Fire this set we had Ward and we had Kiros. We had like Old Ward and Old Kiros, which are like bad. We had set 1, we had the Small Delete and Small Ramza before they became Knights. And a couple other niche cards like such as Warrior Light, both the Opus 1 Water 1 and the Opus 1 Fire 1 are warriors, not warriors of lights. And I think one of the lightnings is a warrior as well. So you see that they're all kind of spread out amongst different colors and they don't have any sort of like reason to work with each other. So Huyurg is like not going to be, at this stage, is not going to be like pushing towards a warrior archetype. That being said though, Huyurg is a warrior, so you can sort of consider the fact that when he enters play, you just, at the very least, you're probably just going to search for another copy of himself, right? So Its ability is kind of niche at the moment, and if you don't have a warrior to search for, then 5 CP 7k is actually really bad. So that really limits the use of this card. Its secondary ability of if you control Leo, Hugh gets plus 1000 power and Brave. Even then, you're sort of like you're getting 8000 power on 8000 power Brave forward. You can play Guy, and not have to risk not having a warrior to sort of pick up. So yeah, so in that regard, I think Hugh, because its targets for its search ability are a little bit too limited at this stage, I'm probably going to say hold off on you sort of playing around with this card until we have a couple more warriors in the game that we can sort of justify building more of an archetype for. Next, we have Matt, and this is a card that slots into a very well-established Earth archetype. He is a 6 CP4 at 8000 power, so he's below the curve, but Job Monk forwards and card name Monk forwards you control cannot become dulled by your opponent's summons or abilities, and when Matt enters the field, you may search for one Job Monk or card name Monk and add it to your hand. So effectively, it becomes a 4-cost 8000 power forward that does search for a Job or name Monk and puts it to your hand. Job Monk or a card name Monk. It doesn't have to be a forward, so you can search for a backup monks as well. And yeah, its first ability basically gives all your monk or like all your monks on the front line, all your forward monks, the ability not to become dull. So they have very similar ability to the guy. Yeah, so it's a pretty solid defensive card, and that's typically how monks like to play. And it pretty much is like kind of hard counters ice, and that Earth has so many abilities that just like they're just really hard for ice to deal with in the form of Matt, in terms of Yang, in terms of Guy. These are all abilities that ice really struggle hard with. So previously ice just like found it difficult dealing with decks with like triple Guy, but now potentially we have probably at this stage Guy probably won't even see play if you have cards like Matt and Yang, who just like stand up or who stay like active the entire time. So yeah, so I think Matt obviously jumps into the monk archetype very well, and having that additional searching is actually pretty solid. Whether you want to search for a backup to sort of help you get the ball rolling, or whether you want to search up for another Yang or Ursula, because those are cards that obviously work into this archetype because they're both monks, and they need to be paired up for maximum value. So Matt allows you to more effectively pair up your Yang Ursulas for that massive like 4 CP double 9k power turn. So yeah, obviously this card is pretty strong. I'd see possibly like 2 copies of them fitting into that archetype, and we might see like a very above semi-competitive sort of monk deck, so that like tier 1.2, maybe slightly under just like tier 1, but it's going to be a very solid deck, and I think this contributes to it. And yeah, even if you splash in some like other new cards such as like the new Warrior of Light that does get additional benefits from standard units, I think yeah, it can be a very solid deck to play with. Next, we have one of the legendaries of the set. It's Minfilia. It's a 6 CP forward. When Minfilia enters the field, choose up to 2 characters in your break zone and add them to your hand. Its secondary ability is Earth, 1 dull. Put Minfilia into a break zone. Choose one light character or dark character and break it. So I feel as a legendary, this card feels a little bit underwhelming. I do feel that this card is really sort of like heroic worthy. At 6 CP and you're getting 2 characters back from the break zone back to hand, it does effectively kind of make this a 2 CP forward. So at the very least, if you need to put down a backup early on, it's fair costed. Its secondary ability is a little bit too niche though, in that you are paying like effectively 4 CP and losing a backup in order to break a light or dark character. So the fact that light or dark characters naturally restrict themselves because they can't be discarded for CP means that in most decks, you'll only have like at most like maybe at most 3 dark characters in your deck, or like light characters you only have like 3. The fact that decks generally don't mix light and dark characters as well means that the amount of targets for a card like this is very small, and like amongst the dark characters, 2 of them like kind of have an immunity to it, in the sense that Camel Nort, if he does sit around for a turn and does transform himself into an Earth type card, means that he can't be hit with this. And the Emperor, he locks off all activated abilities while he's on the field, so Minfilia can't hit those really. So in general, Minfilia is only really going to be hitting light characters. And when you think about it, amongst the light characters, most of them that see play are generally like just pretty good, like high value cards, and you don't really worry about if they're getting destroyed. So if you got Light Zidane, it's not too bad. If you got Light Ace, he gets a enter enter break zone ability, and the Light Warrior of Light also has a similar type ability as well. So most of the light characters generally have like are pretty disposable, and most of the dark characters they're generally pretty strong, and a lot of them have immunities to these kind of effects. Even like casting it on Eldnark. Just puts it back to her hand. So Minfilia doesn't really have much of a place. Her second ability is just kind of not good enough, and it's kind of like hitting too niche, too specific a niche. Its first ability, obviously, to return two characters to your hand has like a lot of utility, but Earth doesn't really have problems with that already, because if it wants to return summons, it's got like quite a couple of cards that can do that, and it does have ways to return return backups or forwards back to hand in the form of Minor or in the form of like Seraphie as well. This doesn't do something that particularly Earth can't do already. The fact that it is a Sign of Seventh Dawn is a plus, but we already have an existing Minfilia in the game in the form of the Stars deck Minfilia that also fulfills the Sign of Seventh Dawn. Obviously, you can't have them both on the field at the same time, so it doesn't help you increase your Scion count. I do think if you were to play the Scion deck, you probably have one copy of her, just for when you run out of your EX burst search of Minfilias, you can put one of these cards into play. But yeah, so other than that, I don't think that this card is particularly amazing. You might see it in like one copy in certain sort of more mid-rangey late gamey decks, simply because if you have particularly strong late game bombs, picking up like being able to recycle through two more of them in the late game is actually very good. So it seems pretty bad, and there's only very few niche uses that can sort of justify this card. Next, we have Mushusu. It's a 2 CP monster. For Earth 1, put Mushusu into the break zone. Choose one dull forward, break it. So this is Yellow Dragon. So most of these dragons are all just like monster equivalents of a specific summon. Earth doesn't really have that equivalent summon. I think it's like very similar to Mustadio that we have from set 1, but in this case you're paying effectively 4 CP in total, plus this card in order to destroy one of your opponent's dull forwards. Actually, no, just choose a dull forward, so it can be yours as well if you would like. And yeah, so like this card seems reasonably well costed. It's pretty solid. The fact that you can break up its cost over 2 specific turns of like the turn that you play it, and then like obviously when you want to use it is pretty good. You can do it when during your opponent's turn. So obviously if your opponent attacks, you can break it straight away, and yeah, you can use it straight away because it is a monster and it isn't a dull ability. So in terms of utility, it's pretty good. Amongst all of out of all of these sort of like dragon monster type equivalents, this one is probably the one that's the easiest to counter, but it's also generally the least conditional. So in that regard, so for example, the Fire Dragon dealt 8,000 damage. The Wind one destroyed a 9,000 or more, and so on. So those are like more conditional than just like choose a dull forward, break it, right? But at that same time, if the forward is no longer dull when this card resolves, it doesn't destroy it. So if you are playing against wind or potentially water, or a couple other forwards that can find ways to reactivate themselves, you can find this ability whiffing. So it's a lot more accountable in the sense that if they reactivate, this card fizzles out. But in general, there's no real restriction on the type of card that can destroy. So yeah, so this card has its pros and cons. I think it's very solid. Yeah, if you're not leaning towards any sort of reason why you would want to play more summons in Earth, then yeah, this is a very solid monster as well. And if you're playing the Water Earth monster deck, I do think that this fits into this archetype very well. Next, we have Moogle Brothers. It's a free CP backup. It's Final Fantasy Crystal Chronicles. When Moogle Brothers enters the field, reveal the top 5 cards of your deck, add 1 Job Moogle amongst them to your hand, and return the bottom to your deck in any order. So it effectively becomes a 1 CP backup because you are able to add a card to your hand with its effect. Its secondary ability is Dull, put Moogle Brothers into break zone, play 1 Job Moogle of cost 2 or less from your hand onto the field. So I did a little bit of research on this card in FFTCG. .com on Mognet, FFTCG Mognet, and yeah, and so like this card, yeah, this card doesn't have too many targets. There were quite a lot of those 2 CP Moogle backups from Opus 2 that this card could put into play. But yeah, there's quite a reasonable amount of like Moogle support as well. There is that new like Wind Moogle from this set that has the S ability to search your deck for any card. So yeah, so obviously you can put that into play. But obviously, since you can use this ability during your opponent's turn, I was looking for any sort of Moogle that had like a cool come into play ability, and there's kind of only one, and that's Artemisian. So like you're not doing anything particularly cool for playing a Moogle on your opponent's turn. Yeah, in terms of the cost of this card, it doesn't really do anything in the sense that like it's a 1 CP backup because it does search for a Moogle, but you do have to load up quite a lot of Moogles in your deck in order to sort of make use of this because you are looking at the top 5 cards of your deck. So a large majority of your backups should be Moogles if you're playing this card in order to not miss on the first ability. And second ability, because this effectively becomes a 1 CP backup, when you do use this ability, you've effectively paid like 2 CP, so like 1 cost to put them into play, pseudo, and then like the 1 cost to sort of activate its ability to put a 2 CP Moogle into play. So effectively, you're kind of replacing this with just like a Moogle in your hand, right? So you're not really gaining a CP advantage for going through all of this. So yeah, it's like, so in that regard, you can only really consider it as a 1 CP backup that you can put in play that happens to have the Moogle job title, which does have synergy in certain cards such as Sarah, where like Sarah from the recent Final Fantasy 13 starter deck, she does have synergy with Moogles. She can reactivate them on attacks, and she can picture extra copies to dull forward. So I don't think Moogles are particularly strong as an archetype, even though they do have like some fun gimmicks attached to them. But definitely in amongst those like more casual events, this will be a fun card to sort of add to your Moogle deck for fun. Next, we have Monk. It's a 3 CP standard unit forward at 7,000 power, so it's on curve. Its ability is dull, put Monk into break zone, choose 1 dull forward, deal at 7,000 damage. So yeah, so this card seems just like very average, but like very dependable, solid average. So obviously the fact that it's Monk is it's probably one of its best values in the sense that Monks just have so much support within the Earth archetype, and it slots in very well with there. So yeah, so the fact that it's a Monk is probably its biggest plus. The fact that it's free CP 7k on curve and it's a standard unit are also just like relevant attributes to this card. So it's on curve and have standard unit. So that's like another way that this card like gets additional value. And its ability is just like straight up not bad. Being able to like dull, put it into break zone to choose 1 4, deal at 7,000 damage is pretty solid. So yeah, that's generally going to kill anything that's 3 or less. Now you generally don't want to be sacrificing your forwards in order to do this, but if there is a situation where your opponent's using some sort of removal to try to destroy your Monk, you can always just counter by using its dull ability to destroy one of your opponent's dull forwards. So there are times where this card will be able to just like when your opponent tries to use removal on him, this card might be able to pull one of your opponent's forwards down the grave with him. Especially if you got cards like Momody that can give a brave. So yeah, potentially you can like Momody this card, give a brave attack, and then during your opponent's turn, your opponent might do something, and your opponent might attack back. And yeah, they might use removal on your Monk. You can just always like sacrifice your Monk to deal 7,000 damage to one of their forwards. So I think like this card isn't like one of those powerhouse cards, but the fact that it's just got so many like above average character traits to it makes it like a pretty reasonable add-in to like the Monk archetype, I feel. Next, we have one of the cards I'm actually pretty excited about for this set. It's Y'shtola. It's a 4 CP forward at 8,000 power, so it's on curve. It's a Scion of the 7th Dawn, so that is that builds into Scion strategy. And yeah, it's got some very interesting abilities. So first of all, Y'shtola cannot be broken by opponent's summons or abilities that don't deal damage. So it's got the Vincent protection ability. So obviously like what this card is saying is that it still receives damage from summons and abilities. But yeah, so any ability that this says destroy or like sort of break a forward, don't break Y'shtola, but she still receives damage, and obviously when she receives damage that exceeds her power, she gets put into break zone as a game mechanic, right? Its secondary ability of if you control 3 or more job scions other than Y'shtola gains brave. So it says like job scions, not job scions forwards or job scions backup specifically. So if you build up a stronger scion backup line, then you're able to trigger off this secondary ability pretty easily. So effectively, in most cases, she's going to have like 8,000 power and she's going to have brave in most cases because in general, you're gonna like try to build up your Scion backup line, right? But her third ability is where she really shines. When Y'shtola attacks, choose a forward an opponent controls. If you control 5 or more drop Scion of 7th Dawn other than Y'shtola, deal at 8,000 damage. So obviously, the practicality of this card depends on two things. One is the speed of this card, and two, the number of Scion of 7th Dawns you can get onto the field, right? So I've done my research, and when you search up the number of Scion of 7th Dawn backups, there currently exists 4. So you got Minfilia, you've got Krill, you've got Alice, and Alphanord, right? So you can at most have 4 Scion of the 7th Dawn backups on the field at any time, right? So in order to trigger off Y'shtola's secondary ability, you're going to need at least another Scion of the 7th Dawn forward on the field, right? In order to trigger off her secondary ability. In terms of speed, the fact that Alice gives all your drop Scion of the 7th Dawn's haste actually makes actually synergizes very well with Y'shtola. So if you do get to that point where you happen to have 5 Scions, you can play Y'shtola out, and then you attack with her on the same turn. So it does have very strong surprise removal ability straight away. While it is a little bit conditional in that it does require a bit of setup, she's a very solid forward that happens to have Brave that also like deals 8,000 damage, which is a lot of damage, especially for Earth, who generally don't have these sort of like too many of these sort of like ping or removal type abilities. Y'shtola can just like throw it out every single turn, every time she attacks, and is able to defend with Brave as well, and has that like natural protection ability of not being destroyed by destruction type abilities. She's a very solid card. Obviously, you do need to build a very specific deck around her, and you have to play very specifically to build towards that strategy. I definitely feel that like a 5 Scion Y'shtola is just unbelievably powerful, and it is a game ender in a lot of cases. Your opponent has to deal with it, or they're probably going to lose the game pretty quickly if you are able to trigger off that third ability very often. And finally, the last card of the set, we have Leo. It is a 1 CP forward at 1,000 power. For each character other than Leo you control, Leo gains plus 1,000 power. Backups you control can produce CP of any element. So this is a card that's actually like very hotly debated in terms of like how good this is. So people thinking, oh yeah, cool. Like it completely color fixes you while he's on the field. Obviously you got to protect him, right? But generally when you think about like color fixing or being able to have backups that can produce the specific elements that you want, that generally tends to be more of an issue towards the early game when you only have like 1 or 2 backups, or you haven't had those backups put into play yet, and you want to play specific cards of other elements and you don't have backups set up, right? So like its secondary ability is an ability that's better in the early game, and its first ability of giving it plus 1,000 power, that's significantly better towards the late game. So if you just look at the fact that you've got 5 backups, at 5 backups, Leo gets plus 5,000 power, puts it up to a 1 CP 6,000 power forward. So straight up, that's actually like just that's very well costed and very cost efficient, but it's not particularly scary at any stage, right? So you really want to be getting to that like 7 or 8 or 9 card mark in order to push this guy to like an 8 or 9 or 10,000 power forward, right? And at a 1 CP cost, that's like very, very good, right? So obviously you got to sort of ask yourself like, what archetype fits into this very well? So do note it does say for each character, so that includes forwards, backups, and monsters, right? So as we were talking about earlier in the set, water earth monsters is already an existing archetype, and the fact that like monsters are generally immune to, actually I think they are immune. Like I don't think there exists any sort of board wiping abilities that affect monsters just yet. Or there's any sort of effect that can just board wipe all monsters. So in that regard, monsters are generally pretty safe from being board wiped. You can just load up a whole bunch of them, and because they count towards Leo's character count, it's very easy in this situation to get like Leo's character count up to like 9 or 10 very easily. So in those strategies, it is very possible and very relevant to get Leo up to a large forward size and just use him as just like as a beater or as a defender. At 1 CP, he's very well costed and he's very well tempoed, so you can just like very easily chuck him down every single turn if you got CP open, if he keeps getting destroyed, or your opponent has to use a lot of resources to try to deal with him. So I think in this regard, he's not one of those legendaries that just like auto includes in older like new Earth decks, but I think in this specific niche deck, he's going to have a very fitting place in it. So I'm definitely interested in trying him out in the Water Earth monsters build, and seeing what sort of like fun shenanigans we can get and how big we can get our Leo up to. And that's it for this video. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Earth had a lot of very interesting cards that we discussed for this set. So is there anything that you guys thought I missed out on, or what are your ideas or what are your thoughts about cards? Did I overrate or underrate cards in your opinion? I do respond to you guys in the comment section. So if you do want to sort of like dig deeper on specific cards or combos, or ask my opinion, definitely do let me know. I do get back to you guys. If you enjoyed this video, please thumbs up and subscribe. It helps with all the YouTube algorithms and all that sort of stuff. And yeah, I'll be back with more videos very, very soon. Thanks a lot for watching, guys. Grand J out.